Hey everyone, welcome to the Zeitgeist on a Mighty Blaze. I am your host, Jane Roper, with you as always on this Thursday afternoon. The Zeitgeist airs a couple Thursdays a month. Which ones kind of varies month by month, so catch us if you can. If you want a heads up about this show and all the other fabulous shows here on A Mighty Blaze, we do mystery, we do chick lit, we do literary fiction, we do a little of everything. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and I believe that's it. We're not on TikTok yet. We should be. We will be. Maybe we are. But definitely visit our website, unmightyblaze.com, and you can sign up for our newsletter there, which will give you the rundown every week of which authors we will have on which shows. And this week on the Zeitgeist, we have Maddie Sinha. Hi, Maddie.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me. Oh, it's an honor to be here. Thank you so much.
So glad you're here with us today. Maddie is not only an author, she has been a practicing physician for more than 20 years, which is kind of like amazing that you're able to do that and also find time to write. I want to ask you more about that in a bit, but Maddie's writing has been featured on National Public Radio, Shondaland, and elsewhere, and she lives in New Jersey with her husband and 2 kids. Her first novel, The White Coat Diaries, which tells the story of a young Indian doctor struggling through her medical residency, appeared on multiple best of and most anticipated lists in 2020, including Marie Claire, Pop Sugar, and E! Online. Her new novel is At Least You Have Your Health, which is a really beautiful cover. I love that.
I love it too. I can't take any credit for it, but I love it.
It's really pretty. Laura Hankin, author of A Special Place for Women, calls it sharply observed, laugh out loud funny, a cautionary tale about the Goop-ification of modern medicine that brilliantly blends satire, suspense, and genuine heart. Author Kristen Rockaway, author of How to Hack a Heartbreak, says At Least You Have Your Health offers insightful commentary on wellness culture, the wealth gap, and the ethical dilemmas inherent to pursuing the stereotypical American dream. That's a perfect description. I think that really sums up a lot of the really meaty issues that you cover here in this sort of deceptively light-hearted book. It's really fun to read. It's funny. And yet you dig into a lot of really, really fascinating stuff, a lot of very current issues. Tell us a little bit about the book. Give us the big picture view.
So At Least You Have Your Health is about a gynecologist who takes a job at a concierge wellness practice that's run by the mother of a student at the school at which the gynecologist's daughter has just started attending. It's an elite private school. And this other mother, her name is Amelia, she is like a wealthy socialite and she has this wellness practice, and she recruits the main character, Maya, to come work for her. And as Maya is drawn into this world of privilege and kind of outrageous wellness treatments, there's also a medical mystery that unfolds involving Amelia's daughter. And it causes Maya to question some of her values and her ambition. And she's forced to make some choices about her life as the story goes on.
Right. Oh, that was beautiful. That was perfect. So now, what inspired you to write this? Has this encroachment of this sort of wellness culture around, of course, the review mentioned it, but I couldn't help thinking about like Gwyneth Paltrow's Goop selling all these kinds of, miracle remedies, like, I don't know, an egg you stick up your hoo-ha and other kinds of craziness. Is that something that you have sort of witnessed yourself as a doctor, or just as a individual?
Yeah, for sure. In my practice, a lot of patients come in to see me for spinal pain or just musculoskeletal pain. And there's a lot of different treatments out there. Some are more scientifically sound than others. And there's a whole, industry that, sadly, in a lot of cases, they're not all bad, but sadly, in a lot of cases, takes advantage of people's desperation to be out of pain and then sells them things that have no merit at all. And so I've definitely seen that over the years. And then the inspiration for the book was a real life gynecologist, Jen Gunter, who wrote a book that came out this year called The Vagina Bible, which is a great nonfiction book, everything you ever wanted to know about women's health.
Yes.
Explained in a really accessible way. But Jen Gunter is kind of famous for having this online feud with Gwyneth Paltrow and, them just butting heads about women's health. And I kind of, when I was thinking about what to write about for this book, Berkeley, my publisher, wanted another book about a doctor. And I after I had written my first book, I was like, I'm kind of out of idea. I was like, I have no ideas. Like, I felt like I'd said everything I had to say about medicine in that first book. And they came back and were like, well, you're a doctor, you have kids, like maybe you'll write a book about a doctor who has kids. And I started there and I was like, well, the first thing that I would do is choose what her specialty would be. And because I follow Jen Gunter and like just gynecology as a specialty is fascinating, because I don't think gynecologists ever just take care of patients. They're not just providers of healthcare, they're also advocates. They are constantly out there advocating for healthcare for their patients. And it just struck me as really fascinating to have to not just be, a physician and taking care of patients, but also like dealing with all these other issues and dealing with, the way that policy influences how what kind of healthcare you can get as a woman in this country. I just thought was a really interesting place to start. And then I kind of drew inspiration after that from this idea that what if somebody like Jen Gunter had to go work for someone like Gwyneth Paltrow, and what would that look like? And then it just kind of took off from there.
That is fascinating. I am familiar with the book, The Vagina Bible, but I love hearing that's kind of the inspiration. Now I feel like I need to go look into I wasn't aware of the feud with Gwyneth, but I want to.
It's kind of old. It kind of goes back a few years, but like it was funny.
Yeah,
it was pretty entertaining.
Yeah. So, I mean, some of one of the things that the character Maya wants to do is bring more education to women and girls about their body. Well, and everyone, actually, not just women and girls, everyone about their bodies and about their, reproduction and health and all this kind of stuff. But you have some very funny moments, funny misconceptions that some of the women in the book have, right? A woman who thinks that, asks if you have a better chance of having a boy if you have sex while you have your period, or, all these kind of crazy. And I was kind of astonished. Like, I guess there is a lot of ignorance, lack of education around this kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, I think, if you think about like where you learned this information from, right? I think we all have a different story about that. So, if you didn't have a family member who, a mom or an aunt or something that told you how your body works, what are your choices? It's, the education system. So depending on where you went to school, that varies widely across the country in terms of how much education girls and boys get about, female reproduction and reproductive system and just basic anatomy. And still in my daughter's school, they separate the boys and girls into separate classes. And she was in 5th grade last year. They had their health, it was like one day of health as opposed to, a more comprehensive curriculum. It was like one day on like puberty and periods and stuff like that, which was great. But they separate the boys and girls into separate classrooms, which, leads me to kind of wonder, like, where are boys getting educated about, female anatomy? And that's an important thing to me. It's science, right? It's just something that should be part of our science curriculum. By the time I got to high school, I knew more about the anatomy of like a cat than I knew about my own anatomy, right? And that just strikes me as really just flawed. And I think, we have to look at the fact that that's got to be related to the patriarchy that we live in, right? And the idea that, if it's women's anatomy, it's not all that important. There's a lot of like shame around, learning about the way your body works and just being honest about that. And I think, as women, that handicaps us, right? It just puts us at a disadvantage. The less we know, the less empowered we are, the less we're able to make informed choices. So I do feel strongly about that. I think that we should be educating everyone and not just sort of like leaving that to like a family to just sort of, you're just getting whatever information you can. And then, of course, you're filling in with the internet, which is, like a minefield of just misinformation. So.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it is astonishing in what you're talking about with regard to, like, I was reading this book when Roe v. Wade was overturned, and it was sort of like, damn, the amount of ignorance that comes out of these people who are making these laws is astonishing also. I mean, it's really, it's repugnant. I think you're right. I mean, it does tie into patriarchy. It ties into a lot of sort of this puritanical instincts in American culture where there is shame around bodily functions. I I have a book that's coming out next year that's all about destigmatizing periods. So it's an issue that I
That's
spent a lot of
amazing.
I've been spending a lot of time thinking about that myself. But anyway, the other thing that I thought was really interesting that you talk a lot about in the book, or cover a lot about in the book, is this idea of cultural appropriation. And it seems that so much of the time, the sort of quest for alternative treatments goes hand in hand with this sort of looking to other cultures, and generally, often Asian cultures, often cultures like in the global South, as if there's, some greater wisdom there that, you have to look beyond your own culture. So it's all kind of wrapped up together, I think, in this idea of, I keep calling it alternative health, but it's not really alternative health. It's almost like, I don't know.
I guess the industry is like the wellness industry.
Right.
Wellness. I certainly don't want to say that all wellness is bad, and I am definitely not saying that all traditional medicine is, that all Western medicine is good, because, as I can say this as a doctor, that we certainly have our limitations, and they are vast and many. But yeah, I mean, you're right. I'm sorry, I cut you off without letting you ask the question.
Just go. I was babbling. So
no, I think you're right. I think it's all wrapped up in the exotifying of Asian cultures, and this idea that there's some sort of mystical power there to whatever comes out of the East. I wanted to write that into the book because I have mixed feelings about that. As a South Asian person and as a physician, I feel a certain way, when I see, Indian, culture being appropriated, and I don't know, just even this yoga. There's a scene in the book where she goes to yoga, and there's a Ganesh on the wall, and she's uncomfortable with that because that's, it's kind of like seeing Jesus at Soul Cycle. It would be weird. That's that's a god, and that doesn't really go with yoga in my mind. And yet, there it is. And how do you deal with that as a South Asian person that lives in the US? And so, yeah, that's kind of what informed that scene as well.
Yeah, it becomes like the commodification of somebody else's tradition or religion. And there's always this interesting line, though, between appropriation and appreciation, right? So where would you say that line is? What is the difference there?
This is such a tough question for me to answer. And it's one that I get asked a lot, in regards to this book. And I never can really figure out how to answer it, because I think it depends on who you are, in terms of who you ask. So if you ask my mom, who is an immigrant, who's lived in the US for 45, 50 years. Mm-hmm. She doesn't understand the concept of appropriation. She just thinks everything is appreciation. In her mind, anyone that wants to, I don't know, wear Indian clothes or whatever it is. Like
Amelia in the book gives her children these sort of, I guess, are they Hindi inspired names or?
Yeah, they're right. They are. They're Sanskrit names that are traditional Indian names. So my mom would say that that's all appreciation. And I think that has to do a lot with the fact that India was a colonized country, and the way she grew up, everything that belonged to the colonizer was considered superior. And I think that there's this internalization of that idea that you are inferior and the colonizer is superior, right? So fair skin in India is a really prized thing, not as much as it used to be, but certainly when my mom was growing up, that's really ingrained in the culture. The more fair you are, the more beautiful you are.
Right.
And so when she came to the US and people would be interested in Indian culture, she always took it as a compliment, oh, they're interested. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whereas I think this generation, my generation and the generation that comes after, we feel, I think, more protective of the culture and more, I think we're more likely to sort of question the motives behind, behind the appropriation / appreciation, whatever you want to call it.
Right. Yeah, because I mean, it also, if you look at that appreciation, appropriation next to the history of colonization, it looks problematic. It looks like coming in and taking something as opposed to really like sharing and respecting something, or almost like being given something, as taking versus giving, I guess.
Right. And I think like if you have like a history, if your personal history includes, moments of racism or, prejudice against you for your culture or your race, and then you see that same, at the same time, it's like the other hand is like taking from your culture and sort of, making it their own, and not appreciating the fact that it's sort of like taking it away from you in a way, right? Like it's right. Like, you're just this brown person, but then all this other like yoga and whatever else like doesn't belong to you anymore. Like, that doesn't feel right.
No, of course. And yeah, you have this scene right at the beginning of the book where some of the women at the school, the moms at the school, are talking about a fundraiser that's going to have the theme "A Night in Marrakesh," I believe, right? Mm-hmm, so, yep. But they're talking about, oh, we'll have tapestries and lamps that look like genie lamps, and but then these are the same women, so we're sort of just with this weirdly like just misguided attempt at creating something Marrakeshi.
Yeah, and it's like close enough. Like no one's gonna really know.
Well, and then what they say about Maya is she's Middle Eastern or something, just this sort of just toss it all together.
Exactly.
And then one of the things that also is a theme in the book, of course, is how Maya is discriminated against. She's mistaken for the babysitter. She's there's a patient who doesn't believe that or assumes that she's not the doctor. I thought all of that was interesting, but what made it even more, I think, subtle and thought-provoking was the way you brought in the character of Esther, who is Maya's medical assistant, or works with her, and she's Black, and how she also faces some discrimination, but it's different. It's not the same. And Maya kind of learns about that. Could you talk a little bit about that relationship and how you explored that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I wrote this book during 2020, and as that year went on, not only was there, the pandemic, but Black Lives Matter happened that summer. And it made me reflect as a South Asian person on, what that, oh, God bless you, on what that meant for me as a South Asian person, like it, race in the US is so, it's such a binary. You're either white or you're Black, and everybody else just kind of, there's no real space for us. I guess we occupy that space in between, that model minority space. And I saw a lot of discussions online, about race, but I wanted to comment on the idea that, while we, as people of color, we all experience racism, I don't think we all experience it in the same way. I have to be honest with the idea that, the history of my people in this country doesn't include 400 years of slavery. It doesn't include systemic disenfranchisement. The history of South Asian people in this country is so different from the history of Black people in this country. And that informs the way that we experience racism. And I think we have to be honest about that. And I think we have to be honest to South Asian people about the fact that being a model minority, while it does hurt us in many ways, it also protects us in some ways. So I don't worry about getting pulled over by police officers. I don't worry about my family members being pulled over by police officers. And it occurred to me like what a privilege that was to not have to be afraid, even though I am, a person of color. It's not the same. And I wanted to say that because I hadn't seen a lot of discussions addressing that. And I think it's important for South Asians to look at that honestly, and understand that, that we can talk about race, and we certainly absolutely deserve a seat at the table when we talk about race, but we are not talking about the same experience as I think the Black community is.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That makes it's, I don't see that. I haven't seen that explored a lot either in fiction. So, and I think that's important for everyone to see. Certainly, I think it's important for white readers as well to try to understand some of those subtleties also. And I thought that was really well done. Since you're talking about the the immigrant experience as well. In your other book, when I was reading about that, there are the expectations on the main character from her parents, right, to be the perfect Indian daughter, and that Maya is facing some of that in this book as well. These expectations of the parents, that she walks a certain path and accomplishes a certain thing. Can you? It seems like I see a lot of that, right, in fiction I've read and nonfiction I've read about the experience of first generation South Asians. Can you talk a little bit about what some of those pressures are and why that seems to be a theme?
Yeah, I think it directly relates to the immigrant experience. Because I think it's not just South Asian immigrants that experience that. In my conversations with immigrants of other backgrounds, I think that's a pretty common experience. Because, when you are a child of immigrants, you basically carry the hopes and dreams of, not just your parents, but your entire family, in a lot of cases. So there's this idea that, your parents sacrificed and came to this country, and you are going to manifest the success, the dream that they had. They will struggle, and you will be the proof that it was worth it. And there's this, really like deeply entrenched idea, I think, in our community.
Losing you for a second.
In the South Asian community that.
Okay.
We're back.
Sorry, you froze for a minute.
Sorry.
You're back.
So there's this deeply entrenched idea, I think in the South Asian community, that I know I internalized when I was a kid. And it wasn't like my parents were constantly like, you have to succeed, you have to succeed. It just was something that was just, it was like it was in the air. It was like something that you just absorbed from everywhere. This idea that your success was going to make their sacrifice worthwhile. And you heard how much that they had to give up for you to be able to live this really charmed life in America. And, you felt obligated, and kind of duty bound to do them proud and to prove that they made the right decision. So yeah, I think that a lot of immigrants, from wherever they're from, I think that's this idea that, yes, I'm going to sacrifice and I'm going to, try to, build myself up without a safety net, right? So, a lot of immigrants, including my parents, came to the U.S. and there's no plan B. They couldn't go back. There's no generational wealth to fall back on. There's no wealthy grandparents to fall back on. So if I failed, right, it's like, what would we have done, right? Like, I think there was always this fear, and I think that's a big part of the immigrant experience as well, is this impending sort of this fear that's always in the background that if you don't make it, if you can't succeed here, what will you do? There's no safety net for you.
Right. The whole goal is to come over and make good and do better. And if that doesn't happen, yeah.
In a lot of cases, there is no way to go back. There is, there's nothing left. The reason you left was because there really wasn't anything. There's nothing to go back to. There wasn't really anything there for you to begin with.
Right. So obviously, you were able to draw on some of your own experience for the book, both your medical background, your cultural background. What else? I was curious about this sort of the setting of this like uber wealthy mainline moms and the some of the Maya goes into the world of sort of the one percenters, right? So huge houses, a house that has an entire medical exam room in it. Is any of this drawn on reality? Did you do research, or were you just like, what's the craziest thing, elaborate stuff I can make up and just have fun with?
So concierge medicine is a real thing. And I did research that online, and there are some really nice high-end practices that will charge, an arm and a leg for, cell phone access to your doctor at all hours and things like that. Right. So that part, I based in reality. Concierge gynecology, as far as I know, is not a real thing. That's just something I made up. Yeah. I think it'd be really hard in practicality to actually run a gynecology practice that way. Although, theoretically, I think it's possible. And then the rest of it, yeah.
An ultrasound machine, that she's down in the back of her van.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's a lot of like machinery to try to like take with you,
right?
To practice, good quality level care.
Yeah.
But the rest of it, like the rich people problems stuff was, all just my imagination. And I had a really good time coming up with all the crazy things that people had in their houses or that sort of thing.
Totally. Yeah. I could tell you were having a blast with that.
Yeah.
and it's all like a little over the top,
right.
for the satirical purposes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like that was kind of where I wanted to be a little extra because it was just fun to do.
Yeah. No, it's way more fun. Yeah. Many of the pieces. Well, it's really, it was impressive. As someone who writes like humor and satire myself, I was impressed at how you, were able to go from this like very real tender moments with Maya's family and the tension with her within her marriage, right? Because when she leaves her job at a hospital to go work for this wellness clinic, she abandons some of her principles. She makes some trade-offs and is doing a lot of rationalization. But you're able to flow between the sort of crazy, fantastical extremes and parody of some of these wealthy women, and those more tender moments and the relationship with the kids. The other thing I wanted to bring up that I admired, and I'd love to hear you talk about how you struck this balance, was Maya. We see her, like I said, we see her making, sacrificing some of her principles or sort of deciding to rationalize her decisions, and kind of lose some of herself, right, as she gets drawn into this world of the wellness clinic and sort of the thrill of being liked and accepted by the fancy moms who sort of never gave her the time of day before. It's all very seductive. So how did you think about doing that in a way that we could really kind of see that Maya was making mistakes, but still sympathize and still be like, well, we get it. We don't hate her, but oh, you're making mistakes. So was that I don't know, kind of something that you had to walk that line carefully when you were writing?
Yeah. I mean, I'm a huge fan of the unlikable main character, the flawed main character.
Yeah.
And I just wanted her to feel really human, right? And I think we've all been at a place in our lives where maybe we haven't been our best selves. And I enjoy writing about that moment, that moment that I think is universal, about when you're just making choices in your own life that you look back on and you're like, that probably wasn't the best idea. I think we've all been there or been at that crossroads. And I just think it's really interesting to pick that moment apart and be like, what was going on in this person's mind? And really the way I approached it was I just wanted to be 100% honest about where she was coming from. And, some of her motivation is not all that admirable, right? Like she's ambitious. She just wants more. But I wanted to show how underneath that ambition is this sense of wanting to prove herself and feeling like, because of the race issues and the class issues, and she's, a woman and in a patriarchy, I think that, you internalize some of that inferiority, right? And her husband doesn't have that. He's just content, and he's, a white man from, and he's happy with the state of affairs. He doesn't feel this need to constantly be achieving more, but I also feel like he doesn't have as much of a need to prove anything. Yes. And she does. She feels this constant need to just prove and again to just keep proving herself and proving her worth, not just to the outside, but to herself, right? Like to prove to herself that she is deserving of being, friends with Amelia, of being part of this crowd, like that she's worthy. And then that informs all of these like not so great decisions that she makes.
Right. Yeah. No, and I love that that contrast between her and her husband. I mean, it's really true, watching his sort of comfort with who he is and where he is, but also sometimes being insensitive to the fact that, look, I'm the breadwinner and I'm, I have a little more pressure on me, not just from within myself, but from the outside world. And that contrast is set up really well. So, in terms of, you talked a little bit about the genesis of the book in terms of the idea. did the plot of the book kind of come to you whole cloth, or is it one of these things where you discovered it as you wrote? I guess basically I'm asking if you're a pantser or a plotter.
Yeah.
Question.
So yeah, I'm definitely a pantser. I wish I wasn't. I try to plot things, I do, and then I just fail spectacularly, and things just veer off in various directions. But somebody said to me once, was at a book club, and I was talking about my my process, and somebody said, "Oh, well, that makes perfect sense because everything else in your life is so regimented, with like my practice and I guess with I'm a pretty type A parent as well." And she said, maybe that's the reason that you enjoy writing that way, because it's like an adventure. And that struck me as really true. Like, I feel like every time I sit down, I have no idea what's going to happen next, and that is thrilling in a way that nothing else in my life is quite as unpredictable and thrilling as that.
Right.
So yeah, I enjoy it. It's terrifying, but I enjoy it.
Right. Well, yeah, no, I mean, and if your writing isn't, if the writing process doesn't come with surprises and joys and unexpected discoveries, I mean, it's not as much fun. So that I can totally relate to that.
Yeah, and there's those moments of terror where I've like written myself into a hole that I can't get out of, and there's like weeks of like nail biting that goes along with that. But
yeah, absolutely, yeah, and trying to dig yourself back out, or figuring out like, can I make this work, or do I have to trash it? And move backward, which is always terrifying.
Yeah, I'm like just constantly at the razor's edge. Like, it might work out, it might not, but
figure it out. Were there, as you were writing, were there any things that like changed majorly along the way, or places you thought you were going to go that you didn't end up going?
Yeah, definitely all of the the more serious themes in the book. The relationship between Maya and Esther was one that just came about one day. And I think it's, it's just my subconscious kind of working through all of the things that were happening in the world, with Black Lives Matter and just kind of thinking about class, right, which became like such an issue during the pandemic that we all started to talk about. How, there was a certain class of people who had access to healthcare, and then the other classes that did not have access to healthcare, and, essential workers on the front lines, getting sick and their families getting sick. And then, wealthy Manhattan people, going to the Hamptons, and then, getting vitamin infusions and drinking ashwagandha or whatever, like to, maximize their immune system.
Right.
Like, all of those things were sort of happening at the same time that I was writing this book. And so then they just kind of found their way into the book. So all of that was a surprise.
Yeah, that's great. And oftentimes it seems like those bigger themes just sort of filter up, and it feels like, it's the subconscious at work, like you said. And when you're thinking about these things, they have a habit of finding their way into fiction. Yeah. We have a question here, and any other questions, please let us know in the chat. Whoops. Sorry, okay. All right, there we go. Painting the Roses Red here. Is this book being made into a movie? That's a good question.
I'm gonna say that I can't give any details about this, but I'll say maybe.
Maybe. Okay. That's a good. Hey, maybe.
Like, fingers crossed.
Yeah. Well, what is it? It's always, what's the expression about it's always yes until it's no in Hollywood or something? I don't know.
Yeah. I guess I don't want to jinx it, so I'll knock on wood and say that there has been some interest, and I'm going to keep and if you're out there, please keep your fingers crossed for me. I think maybe.
Yeah. I think it'd be a fantastic movie or limited series, or absolutely. Of course, it was asking, does your family identify as South Asian or Indian? And you've said South Asian, but it's a good question.
So, I mean, if you ask my mom, she'll say Indian. I don't think that the term South Asian was something that we used growing up. It's, I think, a more recent thing. Yeah. When I do interviews, I address myself as South Asian, but really I think of in my mind they're interchangeable, even though they're not in reality. But in my head, they are. Right.
Yep. Well, and Desi is another term that I've been hearing more and more of as well, to refer to South Asian.
Yeah, and you'd done an interview with the author of the book, Another Appalachia, which I thought was so great. She had mentioned that she talked about her, she referred to herself as Desi, and that's true. In my own mind, that's how I refer to myself too.
What does it mean again? What's the origin of the word?
So it's from the word Desh, which means homeland, which basically means India, Pakistan, Bangladesh.
Right. That's great. That makes a lot of sense. I think there was a question popped up right there, but then it disappeared. Here we go. Audience question. On your thoughts on appreciation versus appropriation, how can you tell the difference, especially if you really think you're trying to appreciate? Okay, yes, from the perspective of someone who is trying to appreciate.
Yeah, and I appreciate it. I think that's a great question. I honestly, I don't think that there's a great answer to this because it will depend on the person who is doing the viewing, right? So, you know, if you're talking to my mom, she's going to appreciate everything that you're doing. And if you're talking to somebody in a younger generation, they may take offense. But I think, you know, I think the only thing you can do is just check your own intention, you know, with that. And you know, if you're coming to whatever that is, you know, from a place of curiosity and respect, then I think you're good.
Yeah. I mean, personally, I've never been able to bring myself to say namaste at the end of doing yoga. I'm just like, that just doesn't feel right. So I'm
oh my gosh, me too.
Yeah, okay. I'm this like white girl. I just like namaste is not part. But I love doing yoga. Like I'm down with the yoga. I just
so namaste is something that we say like to like I would say it to my grandparents or like other people my grandparents' age. We would say, you know, namaste, like it's, you know, it's nice to see you, or you know, before you said goodbye or something. It's just very out of place for me in the yoga studio. Like it's at the end, we're wrapping up. Like I'm not sure who I'm namasteing to.
Right.
Yeah, like it to me, it just feels, I don't know where that came from. I always find that kind of amusing.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Good. That makes me makes me feel better. Like, okay. Here's a question. Were you ever torn between wanting to be a doctor and wanting to be a full-time writer? How did you choose? And yes, this anticipates a question I was going to ask about how in the world you manage. I mean, I know there are many people who somehow manage to be writers and full-time doctors or lawyers, but yeah, great question.
I mean, I don't manage. I just do it badly. Like I'm like constantly winging it. Like I feel like there's never enough time to write. And it's just like a formula that I'm constantly like retooling to try to figure out like, when am I going to squeeze in the 5 minutes here, the 5 minutes there? Right. Which is really how I do it. I just kind of fit the writing in wherever. Have I ever been torn between? Not really. I guess maybe like sometimes I think it would be great to just write full time, but then I'll spend like a week writing and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is like way too stressful. I need to you know, do something else. Right. I like the balance between both. And I also think that they're complementary pursuits because as somebody who loves stories, as I know you do too, Jane, like my job every day is meeting like a variety of people from all walks of life who I would never otherwise get to meet. And my patients can be teenagers, they can be, you know, senior citizens, anywhere in between. And I generally have time because of the type of practice that I have to spend time talking to patients about their lives and what they do. And I find that endlessly fascinating. Like I've, you know, had patients who are FBI agents and actors and I had a patient not long ago who literally flies fighter jets for a living. Like there's no way in my regular life that I would ever get to interact with these people and ask them all of these things about their lives. And people are pretty forthcoming with their doctors. So I hear all sorts of like family drama and like just, you know, this wide range of stories. And that's every day for me. And it's just such a gift, I think, is, you know, my normal life. I grew up in a, you know, really pretty sheltered environment. And I didn't really realize the vast scope of life that was out there until I, you know, went into the hospital and I was like, oh, all of life happens here. Right. And like, as a writer, I think that enriches me so much, you know, it just enriches my life so much, but also informs my writings in a way that I feel like is so valuable. I can't imagine doing one without the other.
Right. Oh, that's fantastic. What a great answer. It's one absolutely fuels the other. And it sounds like, I feel this way also. It's like if I have too much time on my hands, I cannot be productive. So having some boundaries around it. I mean, sometimes it'd be nice to have a little more. And you've got kids in the mix as well, so you know that's sort of like a chaotic force in the mix as well.
Exactly, because that's totally unpredictable, right? Somebody gets sick, and then you just, you know, there goes your writing time for like another week or whatever.
Right. Exactly.
But yeah, it is nice. I mean, if I feel like there's a little bit of pressure, like I only have this hour, then I do tend to get more done.
Yeah, totally. Makes sense. So one final question is, you did say, I think, that you're working on another book. Is that right?
I am.
Can you tell us anything about it, or is it top secret?
It's not top secret. It's just because I'm such a pantser, I don't actually know what it's really going to end up being about. So far, I know that There are no doctors in it so far.
Oh, okay, I
So
was going to
far.
ask, what's another medical themed thing?
Yeah. So far, there aren't any doctors in it. It's more about the relationship between two sisters and kind of like a journey that they take. So I'm just like at the very beginning, kind of in the first act of it. And I'm kind of trying to figure out their different personalities. And then I'm going to see where those personalities take me.
Awesome. That sounds great. Well, we will keep an eye out for it. Everyone, pick up your copy of At Least You Have Your Health. You can get it. We've got a link in the thread with a link to our bookshop.org place. Of course, pick it up at your convenience at any other bookstore of your choice, but we're especially like it when you go to bookshop.org to help support A Mighty Blaze. So thank you so much, Maddie. It's been great talking with you.
Thank you so much.
Yes, and our fingers are crossed for that other thing that we're not talking about.
Thank you so